The United States of America, the good old USA. We call ourselves the land of the free and the home of the brave, yet we have the highest incarceration rate in the world, beating China, whose population is 4 times bigger than our own, Russia, and Brazil. Today, there are 2.2 million people in America's prisons and jails, a 500% increase in the last 40 years. This doesn't even begin to include those on probation or under house arrest. Does this just mean that Americans commit more crimes than other countries? No, we actually have a crime rate that is lower than the international norm. It is not the actual crime that makes us more disciplinary or punitive in the United States, but the way that we respond to crime and how quick we are to label people as criminals. Did you know that we have more prisons in America than we do colleges or universities? Talk about priorities. Or that the average annual cost to incarcerate one inmate is about $29,000. This means that incarceration costs taxpayers $70 billion annually. We think that locking people up and throwing away the key will fix this quote-unquote crime problem that we have and decrease violence, but it has only given strength to bigger issues that we are facing today in society. Today, there are more people behind bars for a drug offense than the number of people who were in prison or jail for any crime in 1980. In the criminal justice system, we are faced with inequalities like racism, sexism, mass incarceration, police brutality, overpopulation in prisons, and fiscal burdens on states. How did we get to this point? Let us explain. In 1971, President Richard Nixon declared drugs as public enemy number 1. Because of this, he implemented the Comprehensive Drug Abuse Prevention and Control Act. This was supposedly aimed to decrease the rate of drug abuse in the country. Even though Nixon's presidential term was short-lived, this idea of getting tough on crime has only increased under every president since. In reality, the war on drugs was a ploy that resulted in dramatic growth in incarceration rates. When Ronald Reagan took office in 1981, tougher policies were implemented. Ironically, drug crimes were on the decline, with only 3% of the American population identifying that drug use was the biggest problem our country was facing. But because of the political agenda that Reagan had, this rhetorical war on drugs became a literal one and was declared in 1982, with the number of inmates incarcerated for drug abuse starting at 40,900. Today, that number has increased to over 450,000.
The war on drugs has not affected all people equally. In fact, there is much evidence to show that this war was declared in order to segregate racial communities in this country even further. An example of this in action is the harsh sentences that come with using or possessing crack cocaine. Since crack cocaine was used by primarily black inner-city people, Ronald Reagan used this to his advantage to build more public support for the war that was being fought in this country. Even though African Americans do not use drugs at a higher rate than whites, their quote-unquote drug of choice is crack. Because of this, people who were found with only 1 gram of crack received the same punishment as someone found with 100 grams of coke. In 2010, the Fair Sentencing Act was passed under Barack Obama, making the ratio now 18-1. But because crack and coke are chemically the same drug, the only true fair ratio is 1-1. This whole get tough rhetoric was a motive that was used to appeal to white voters, particularly the poor and working class, in order to keep their power as the quote-unquote superior race. By labeling African Americans and Latinos as criminals, they would be able to lock them up and not have to worry about attaining racial equality. The war on drugs was an attempt to create an invisible us versus them scenario and persuade constituents that crime is the issue, when all along it was meant to keep the races segregated. This is what Michelle Alexander calls the new Jim Crow. Today, racial minorities contribute to 37% of America's population, yet 67% of the prison population. Something doesn't add up here. What happened to create this racial disparity in the criminal justice system? Do people of color just commit more crimes? Are they more prone to violent lifestyles? No. In fact, people of all races commit crimes at an equal rate. This substantial difference in incarceration rates is due to policies aimed at incarcerating racial minorities, implicit and explicit racial bias, and socioeconomic inequality. In other words, mass incarceration is due to racism. Overall, African Americans are more likely than white Americans to be arrested. Once they are arrested, they are more likely to be convicted, and once convicted, they are more likely to face stiff sentences such as life in prison or the death penalty. Black men are 6 times as likely to be incarcerated as white men, and Hispanic men are more than twice as likely to be incarcerated as non-Hispanic white men. 1 in 3 Black men and 1 in 6 Latino men face life imprisonment compared to only 1 in 17 white men. This disparity embeds racial inequality in our country even further.
Life after prison is very difficult on most people. For one, prisoners have a difficult time reintegrating into society. They have to carry with them the stigma of being an ex-convict. Employers, neighbors, friends, and family will always think of this label when they see that person. Also, released prisoners are faced with the complication of finding housing and applying for jobs. On most job applications, they have to check the box that they have been convicted of a felony. This limits the opportunities that they can pursue because most employers or landlords do not want ex-convicts. They fear that they will be dangerous or give a bad reputation for their business or housing. Finally, released prisoners have a hard time coming back into society because many of them do not have job skills or an education. While some of them may have a GED or high school diploma, most of them do not have a degree or certification higher than that. They are then thrown back into society with no qualities that can service others or other job skills. They may learn a few things in prison, but resources are limited for them while they are still serving their time. Society progresses quickly, and it's hard to keep up with all updates and innovations even while living outside of the prison.
So what now? How can we help come up with solutions to the issues of the criminal justice system in the United States? Well, you are taking the first step. Educating yourself and others about the issues and becoming aware of underlying themes in policies and political rhetoric is important in understanding why there is a problem in the first place and where it stems from. Many aspects of American society have been founded on inequality and racism, and our jails and prisons are no exception. The term institutionalized racism is often used to describe this phenomenon and can help explain Michelle Alexander's idea of the new Jim Crow. This term means that social institutions such as schools, businesses, and even prisons are built on foundations of racism and inequality. Realizing the hidden inequalities in policies aimed at combating crime in the United States is a crucial step to confronting the issues of the system. Supporting lawmakers who oppose things like harsh criminal punishments, mandatory minimums, and unequal sentencing laws can help change the course and shift away from the get-tough views on criminal punishment. Educating others about inequalities and injustices in the criminal justice system can also have a significant impact on society's overall view of people who are locked up. If more people know the truth behind our nation's failures in criminal corrections and the lack of comprehensive rehabilitation efforts, maybe more people will be sympathetic towards people who commit crimes and want to help. It may seem like our awareness, concern, and actions won't have that great of an impact, but with other like-minded people who are willing and ready to make a change, we can begin to break down the injustice of the criminal justice system in America.